Hi guys, welcome to our free webinar for Mastering Light. We have 7 speakers over here that are presenting, actually 6 because Marina and I are going to present together. So we're going to talk about our upcoming workshop, and we're going to actually give you guys tips about how we capture light in nature photography. All right, so a couple of house calls before we want to jump right into this. One is that if you guys want to ask questions, please ask questions using the chat box. All right, and please make sure that everybody's muted so everybody can hear us. There's also a 20% discount code that we're offering for next 24 hours. If you guys want to sign up for our workshop over the weekend, you feel free to sign up. Our workshop is live event. However, if you cannot make it, if you have kids at home, you have soccer games, you're stuck in pandemic quarantine and don't have no internet access, which could be just cruel, you can watch the recording for 1 full year. The 20% discount code that Chrissy is going to put up is valid only for 24 hours. So make sure you use it. Tomorrow at around 11 o'clock or by noon, I think, it will expire. So if you want to use it, just go ahead and use it before that. All right, so we have 6 online classes that compose of this workshop. And today we're going to talk about how each of these classes is going to show you how you can go ahead and master light in nature photography. So I'm going to start, and then Padma is going to go next. After that, we're going to have Alan presenting, then Kate, and then we're going to have Joseph, and then Jack will go last. All right, so let's talk about light in nature photography, okay? So here's all the workshop classes that are coming up, and I'm going to start by talking about light and exposure. When you're out in nature, one of the biggest things that is challenging for any photographers, the pros, amateurs, everything, is that unlike a portrait photography, you have absolutely zero control over the light, right? So you want to capture a light like this that you see in the sky. But what happens if aurora doesn't show up, right? Everybody wants to go out and get shots like this. And everybody wants to experience light like this that you see on your screen. This was in Death Valley. We had like water and reflection, and the sky was just totally going nuts after the storm, right? But in reality, what we end up happening a lot of times, not always, is we end up with light like this. So let me ask you guys a question. What's wrong with this light? Okay. So see if we can get a few answers. What's wrong with light like this? Anybody?
Too harsh.
It's middle of the day, right? Harsh light. That's right. It is really harsh light. But it's too bright. But let me give you an answer. When you go out in the field and the sun is like this, what happens if I were to tell you there's absolutely nothing wrong with this light? Because let's just face it, right? You go out on a landscape photography journey, you are going to get light like this in the middle of the day. So if you are encountering light like this, and if your answer is that, hey, there is something wrong with the light, you're not thinking correctly. Because when you're trying to master light in nature photography, that's not how you're going to be able to do it. So let me see what we can do with light like this, right? So when you are facing a light like this and you try to take photos, you're going to end up with photos like this. Either it's overexposed that you see on the left side, or it's underexposed. Well, what if you change your way of thinking and saying, what is perfect to shoot for light like this? This photo that I took that you see was taken at the same time as when we were wandering out in the parking lot photo that you saw. So if you were to go over here, and if I were to walk in, you see this little platform and this big tree. that is exactly what you're seeing over here. So all I did was just use my long lens, zoomed in, and captured the light. I changed the subject, right? I didn't change the light because I have no control over light as a nature photographer. So you say, oh, wow, you got lucky. There were these rays of the sun. Well, the same location can produce this photo. Now, this is middle of the day. This is around noon. We chartered a helicopter. And this 100-foot island that you see, we actually landed the helicopter there. And I told the pilot that I want to land the helicopter in the middle of the island. Raina Patel jumped out, and I took off. And I took this photo of her from the helicopter from about 50 feet above where she was shooting on a sandbar. So what happens in a light like this is you need to change your way of thinking. That is the key to landscape photography and mastering light. Now, what happens in harsh light is, here's another example, real quick. This photo was also taken at the same location from the parking lot. And this island photo was in Fiji, also in the middle of the day, right? Now, one of the things that is important to remember is things that impact light, right? What impacts light? So one of the things that impact light is motion. So see this photo? This has a particular kind of shutter speed I used. Now, this particular photo is a different shutter speed. So one of the things that impacts shutter light is motion. Now, in order for you to master light, you need to be able to learn to see the light, okay? So there are different kinds of lights. So this particular photo that you saw is reflected light. Okay, the light was reflecting from the vegetation, and I ended up capturing this. Now, this particular photo is reflected light with really slow shutter speed. Another kind of light that we actually find is what we call backlit situation. So this is a backlit situation. The sun is in front of you. The subject is between you and the sun. And this is a really hard light to capture. And the reason it's hard to capture is because when you try to capture this, you're going to end up with knowing how to bracket. All right. So when you come to my workshop, we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about types of light, so you know how to recognize the light you're dealing with. Then we're going to talk about difficult situations in capturing light, which is bracketing. And we're going to show you how to bracket and determine exactly how the bracketing works. Now, I know some of you will be like, oh, what's the big deal? I'll just bracket like plus minus 2 stops, everything will work out. Well, it doesn't always work that way, right? So we will show you guys how to bracket and exactly what range the bracketing should be, okay? So sure, for this particular photo, plus minus 1 stop would have worked great because the range of light was narrow, it was pretty misty, the sun was being filtered through the mist. Now, over here, people will say, how did you bracket this shot? And a lot of people, when I ask the question, and there's a blog post on our website for this, is how to bracket photos. If you actually were to go to this location and bracket these photos, and you were to bracket even plus minus 2 stops, you won't get it right. The reason is that this particular shot required me to bracket at normal exposure, minus 2 stop, and then minus 4 stop to get the entire dynamic range. So my bracketing was actually skewed one way. And the reason it was skewed one way is because my brightest area, which is the sky and the sun, was a really small fraction of the scene. So in our class, we're going to talk about bracketing, how to bracketing, and exactly how much range do you need, and whether it's skewed or not skewed, how can you tell? We're going to talk about histograms and how to use that for bracketing. That is what we're going to teach you. We're going to teach you how to learn to recognize light and why different kinds of light will pose different kind of challenges. All right. So let me give you a couple of more examples before I leave you with some question time. Okay. This particular photo, right? Everybody wants to go to Iceland or Norway and get a photo like this. Well, if you were to go and shoot aurora, this particular photo was taken in Iceland before the moon came up, right? It was completely dark. When you were to go there and you were to look through back of your viewfinder, this is what you're going to see. Now, people who are shooting with your DSLR, right, won't be able to see this because remember, DSLR, unlike an optical camera, will try to capture light and try to figure out how to present the light in a low light situation. So check out these settings, right? I have a 10-second exposure. I'm using an f2 lens, which is pretty fast. And I know that I'm overexposed by one stop, but my viewfinder is unable to display that. Now, there are ways you can get around it. One of them is called bright monitoring. I don't know how many of you guys know about bright monitoring, but when you guys come to my workshop, we're going to show you, we're going to go on location in Iceland, and we're going to play a video where you'll be able to see the back of my camera. We'll show you how you're going to be able to capture this, how you're going to be able to compose this, how you're going to be able to focus on this. So composition is a challenge. Another challenge is focus. How do you focus this? You can't use your autofocus just like this in a light like this, right? It's just not get a focus lock. Yeah, you can fool around with manual focus, but if you can't see, you can't even use your manual focus. Well, one of the worst thing that happens in a digital camera is even if you have something called bright monitoring, which allows you to see in really dark conditions, when you try to manually focus it by using a focus assist like zooming in, the camera comes out of bright monitoring. That's at least my Sony does. So it becomes really challenging. So we're going to talk about how different kinds of light will pose different challenges. So you notice that the front light pose challenge of bracketing. Low light situation will pose challenge of composition, and it will also pose challenge of focus. How do you overcome that? And that's what we're going to talk about in the workshop. Okay, you're going to see on location videos by myself and Verena when you watch our tutorial. So another thing is, here's another backlit situation, right? This is Grand Tetons. I was there out with my son and we were wandering around when the storm broke up and the sun beams just shone through. Now, if I was to ask you guys a question, let me ask you guys a question, right? Now that I've given you some idea is this a bracketed shot or is it not a bracketed shot? What do you guys think? Yeah, well, I saw one answer, no, yes, bracketed. Now the question is, people who said no and people who said yes, how can you tell whether it's bracketed or not, right? We use histograms. Now, ideally, I would have liked to bracket the shot, but at the time I took the photo, I had nothing. I didn't know how to bracket the shot, so I took a single exposure. So this is a single exposure shot. So I was able to process it by bringing out the shadows and by toning down the highlights. But by looking at the photo, you don't really know. Now, this particular photo, when I ask people, is this a bracketed shot or not? Almost everyone says it's not a bracketed shot. But this is a bracketed shot. And you know how the reason we did this is a very nice photo, by the way. So this particular swirls that you see in the foreground were made with a 30-second exposure. Guess what happens when you have a 30-second exposure and a fast-moving waterfall, right? If you have a 30-second exposure and a fast-moving waterfall, what's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is the water will turn just completely without any flow lines. So what Verena did was she actually bracketed this shot with two different exposure, a 30 seconds to get the flow lines in the foreground and a 0.6 seconds to get the flow lines in the waterfall.
Hey,
So
Jay,
that is how it happened. Yeah.
we have a quick question. When you say bracketed shot, are you talking HDR? Is there a difference in the terminology change?
No. So what does bracketing mean? All right. So bracketing means taking multiple photos in camera with different shutter speeds. Now that is what bracketed means. When you put those photos together, that's when HDR and manual bracketing comes in. Almost every photo that we process. In fact, I can tell you that on my computer and Verena's computer, every single photo we process, we used something called luminosity masking. And Joe is going to present more about luminosity masking later on in this tutorial. So all these photos that you saw that I have presented here for you, none of these photos are HDR. They're all done manually by putting together using luminosity masking, and Kate and Joe are going to present in more details what that means. All right. So now that you know what we're going to do in our workshop, I want to give other people opportunity to present what they're going to talk about in the workshop and how they go about capturing photos. Okay. So I am going to turn over, and if you guys have questions for me, feel free to ask in the chat. So when other people are talking, I may be able to answer the questions for you. Okay. So, all right, I'll stop my screen share. So let's see. And I'm going to turn it over to Padma. Padma, you're up.
All right, so it has to be quick because I only have 15 minutes and I can speak for 2-3 hours. Anyway, so I'll be talking about backlighting because I am known to be a drama queen and I like drama in my photography. And backlighting creates the most dramatic images. I also love flowers very much, and so I combine both of them. Even though it says macro, I would like to refer that to more like a close-up photography. So I will be sharing a lot of tips as to how I do my backlit photography indoors and outdoors in the upcoming workshop. And so Jay actually touched upon a few things that I also would like to reiterate. Harsh light should not stop you from not photographing or photographing, sorry. So meaning this was taken in the middle of the day. I used a 7200 lens, zeroed in so that I can avoid a lot of harsh light. And so again, the composition is, we call this champagne glass composition. For tulips, it works beautifully. And so if you look at it, this looks like a champagne glass. And then you can also achieve nice bokeh in here. I will be talking about this technique in the workshop as well. I'll be going through a little quickly so that I can cover a lot more ground. Okay. So there is this is a lotus season, right? Another 2-3 weeks. It started around June 1st. I'm in New Jersey. So if you're in New Jersey, New York, Washington, D.C. area, this is the best time to go photograph lotuses. And in Washington, D.C., there is a national lotus gardens. It's called Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens. I have about 1,000 images every time I go there. And that's the best place to practice your backlighting during the day, because one thing, you cannot stage any of these pictures. So you have to really practice how you can study the light. By the way, backlighting basically means, the light source, if it is sun or if it is artificial light, whatever, it's in the back of your subject. And if you are doing landscapes, it's a little bit difficult to control that. But if you're doing the flowers, it is extremely easy if you start paying attention. I'm not saying that it will be easy the first time or the second time, but if you start the practice of observation, it will become much, much easier. And so these are the two examples of what I have here. So on my right-hand side, my son was actually holding black cloth. This is outside. You cannot bring the lotuses. You cannot cut the lotuses. and bring them home. So my son was holding it. It was almost about to fall in the water, but I would like, please, I would give you $5 if you hold this black cloth for me. So that's how I got this on the right-hand side. And this one is just plain 400 lens that I was far away. And then I saw this flower glowing, and that's how I got this shot. So when I'm outside looking for any kind of backlit flowers, I carry about 3 or 4 lenses with me. I have a 100 macro lens that is dedicated to one camera body. And then I have 7200 dedicated to the second camera body. But I also carry in my car a 100-400 lens and also a 180 macro lens. All these 4 lenses are heavily used, but my 100 macro is probably 70% of my pictures are taken with 100 macro. Most of them are Canon lenses. So this one also is taken outside. Again, my son was holding the black cloth for me. I always carry a black velvet cloth, and it is not difficult. You just have to pay attention that you're not blocking the sun with your cloth. And also in this case, if I know any better now, I also carry like little discs of diffuser and a reflector. I probably would tame this a little bit, but in this case, again, I like the drama here. And then I have a printout of this one, and this makes excellent gift to any, like wall hanger. So I gave it away as like 2-3 people, and absolutely. And I also sold a few copies of this because, again, it kind of, people can relate to this kind of image, and then it can be hung anywhere. It goes with most of the decor. So now also taken this one in the sunflower field. Again, you need to have a son or a daughter or a friend who is willing to hold the black cloth for you. And this is around 6 p.m. and the light is coming through, and I saw the yellow glow coming out of this flower. So again, I had to beg my son, sushi, ice cream, money, whatever I can throw at him. And then, so again, it's a 7200 lens that I used. I will talk about settings in a couple of minutes. Roadside, I'm in New Jersey. New Jersey Turnpike is one of the major highways that goes through New Jersey from top to bottom. And we have wildflower fields on the roadside. So I don't mind stopping, even though several people warn me, don't stop, it's emergencies only. And I say that this is flower emergency. Again, 7200 lens, look for the light, look for the flowers glowing, and sometimes you might have to kneel, sometimes you have to look up and literally on your belly and then looking up. So I'm just showing like quick examples of this. And this is just a grass plume. And once you start looking for the light, the backlight and the glow, you can stop. It's not a switch that you can easily turn off, at least for me. Even my car knows when to stop. I think it knows already. It can read my mind. So I also specialize in light box photography. So what I do is sometimes I clip some flowers, bring them home, put them on my light box, and then use my light box as the source of the, for the image. So in this case, this peony is like absolutely glowing. So by now you know the theme, right? I'm looking for the glow. It can be golden glow, it can be silver glow, doesn't matter, but I want that glow. The petals need to glow with light, and that's backlight. That's the simplest definition that I can give. This is another one. If say it's overcast day, how do you do backlighting? This is done middle of the day, and this is again 7200 lens. It's a dogwood. Generally, dogwood blossoms always look up to the light source, to the sun. So I couldn't turn around unless I have a ladder or something. So this is like, I'm just standing and then holding my camera up, just looking at the flowers. And this reminds me of a Japanese kind of flower art. And this one is taken in Longwood Gardens. This is called Blue Poppy, also called Himalayan Poppy. And so everybody goes there. There are like 20 poppies and about 30-40 photographers fighting over. And you can only get in there about 1 week, maybe 10 days in a year, usually second week of March. So everybody was fighting over the space. So I stood way back with my 180 macro. And then I use the panel of the greenhouse as my light box or kind of light source. And I overexposed about 2 stops. And I also auto bracketed. And I'll tell you the uh, importance of auto bracketing. Jay already touched upon it, and 90% of the time I do auto bracketing, and I also use exposure compensation to get to where I need to be. Now, this is a little trick that I learned from somebody else. I'm sorry, this is not my original original idea, but I kind of improved it. So I got these leaves, fall leaves. I brought them home, and I used my computer. I have a 34-inch monitor. So the computer monitor, I brought up the same image I've taken with the regular, with the no special effects or anything, but out of focus. I loaded that onto my monitor, and then I used that as my background, and I took this shot. So basically, you don't have to leave your house to create art. And some people ask me, but this picture is not sharp. And that's another thing that I would like to talk about is when I'm doing flower photography, I don't really go for like ultimate sharpness. I do other kinds of photography, architectural, landscape. There, I want sharpness, like, frame edge to edge. But in this case, as long as the very important or the focus point is there for like a little sharp area, and then rest of it can be like completely blur. And I like to think about that as fine art. And I also want to tell other people to start looking at flowers as like poetry or a melody, or like a curvy woman that's celebrating curves. So that's my mantra. Now, what settings do I use? Generally, let's go through what are the important features that you need to learn. Is first thing, auto bracketing. It is your friend, and please learn it before you actually go into the field and struggling there. So practice at home how to do the auto bracketing. A lot of people don't know. Exposure compensation is essential. The reason why I'm saying exposure compensation is because then you don't need to leave your camera in manual mode. You can shoot with aperture priority mode. With exposure compensation, that essentially becomes manual. Also, slightly overexposing the subjects in the backlighting situation would help, but you have to also pay attention to the hard spots in the background. So the more you shoot, the more aware you will become. So you have to put in your 10,000 hours, I think, at least 1,000 hours, I would say. So again, like I mentioned, flowers do not need to be overly sharp to look beautiful. My favorite aperture is about f5.6, but I don't mind doing f2.8 to f5.6. And sometimes when I'm doing black backgrounds, I do f8 to f11. Now, there is also, when you're doing bracketing, it's not just exposure bracketing. You can try different other bracketings. So I call it aperture bracketing. So what I do is I take shots 2.8, 5.6, and f8. And sometimes I take all three into Photoshop, layer them, and then I take f8 for the flower, and then leave the background as blurry that comes from f2.8 layer, so that I have best of the both worlds. It's called aperture bracketing, and I love to do that. And that way I can come up with some really nice blurry backgrounds, but then I still have my sharp flower pictures. Now, ISO bracketing is another thing that you should try, just to make sure that you have, say, usable ISO, because sometimes if you shoot at like, say, f1600 and your camera probably doesn't perform well, so you might want to try that ISO bracketing 100, 200, 400 and see which is the best ISO that you can get away with less noise. Because not in every situation that you can use ISO 100. If it is too windy, you might want to have a shutter speed of 1/400th of a second, 1/600th of a second, whatever, right? So that means if you cannot change your aperture and if you're stuck with your shutter speed, that means the only variable that you can change is ISO. So please play with the ISO and then see what is the best ISO for your camera. And okay, so in backlighting situations, polarizer will not help because you're directly shooting into the sun. So don't even bother with that. And what else? Some of the challenges that you can face. Auto mode does not work, okay, if you're doing the backlighting, because your camera gets confused. So please do not use auto bracketing. And the camera meter, don't rely on it completely. I would rather rely on the histogram rather than the camera meter itself. And lens flare can be an issue. I'm going to show you some examples in the upcoming workshop as how I can either use the lens flare to my advantage or how to avoid it. And how to tame the harsh light using the diffuser and such, we will be talking about it. Also, backlighting does not mean that your photo or your flower has to be completely contrasty, because a lot of contrast in flower images don't look very good. So I tried to go with less contrasty, still have the backlighting on the flower. So I'm going to show you some of the examples in the upcoming workshop, how to process them. Now, if you look at this, this is just a regular snapshot. I was in Asheville Botanical Gardens and North Carolina Arboretum. And I just sat down on the floor and then I took a shot. I had a 100 macro on. Nothing special about it. All I see is backlighting, but it's clutter, like some clutter, right? So all I did is, if you look at my settings on this side here, I use the adjustment brush. One here, and one here, the 3 points. And these are the settings on it. So I tried to completely darken. I did not get out of Lightroom for this. I'm just in Lightroom. And my overall settings are, I adjusted the white balance just a little bit, brought up the exposure just a little bit, and brought up the contrast. And that's all I did. It took me less than 2 minutes from going from there to there. And so you can experiment, and I will be talking a little bit more about the same image as to, like, I'll give you the live demo in Lightroom how I did this. So, yep, I have one more and then I'll be done, Jay. So in this case, again, my name is Padma, right? And Padma means lotus in Sanskrit. So I really love my namesake flowers. Okay, so, and then every year I take, again, like thousands of images, and this is one of them. And I took 2. This is -1, and this is 0 exposure composition wise, and 2 outer bracketed images. Now I did a regular white balance adjustment, lens corrections in in Lightroom. Open them into Photoshop as 2 layers. If you look at this one and this one. And basically what I did is I took this part, background, from this area, and I took the flower from this image. Now, if you see my mask here on the right-hand side, you see this screenshot, and I masked it in. So basically I got this. But before I did that, basically I picked both the layers and then I aligned them because I was hand holding. So there is a little bit of a change in the alignment. So I did the alignment first, and then I used the layers and masks and to get to here. But now if you see, when I auto aligned, there is so much space, the transparent space. So I used the transform tool and then quantitative fill tool to get away from all that. And then I fixed a little bit of blemishes, and I fixed the clone, hotspots and such. I cropped it a little bit, and this is what I got. Now, I did not want to make everything black because I thought that these flowers are giving me some kind of nice curves and nice background. So I wanted to show a little bit of the background where the flower is. So I left them, but then they're not overpowering the subject. Now, when I do this kind of work, I come up with like a couple of variations of the image. I just don't do one kind of processing. So this is one straightforward. And then I did a little bit more creative effort. And I will be talking briefly about how to do multiple exposures in Photoshop also in my upcoming workshop. So.
All right, but now, so there was a question that I'm going to ask real quick before you drop off, which is, how do you pose the flowers on a light box? I don't know if you, I mean, just be short because we do have other people coming after you.
Sure. So first of all, if you want like an in-depth light box photography, I did do that in May, I think, right?
Yeah.
Jay? And so basically I have a light box and I light it up, like plug it in, and then it lights up, and then I put the flowers on top. if it is a horizontal position, or I put the light box in the vertical position and I tape the flower to the light box, or I put it on a little vase. And then overexposing is important when you're shooting on a light box, at least by 2 stops. I'll start with that. And then generally I go to +2, +1, and +3 auto-bracketed exposures.
Cool. All right, thank you. You guys have any questions for Padma, please feel free to ask in the chat box. She is not going to be with us for very long, but I will pass on the questions to her so we can get back to you. All right.
Thank you, Jay.
I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Shapiro. Alan, you're muted.
Hey, everybody.
There you go.
Better? Okay. So I get the moody part of the presentation because I get to talk about light and mood. And I think that's appropriate because I'm an incredibly moody person, for those of you who know me, in only the best way. I find that no matter where I am and no matter who I'm with, like my moods will change dramatically based on the situation, based on what has been occurring that I'm escaping or what I am excited about going to. That wasn't always the case because when I started photography, I've been shooting for about 10 years now and about only 5 or 6 professionally. So I remember reading all the books and they said, well, you know, there's really good times for light. And so you have to go out during blue hour and golden hour. And so I would find myself getting up really early in the morning and running off to whatever garden I could find. Let me share my screen. And so I would be crawling through bushes to find, can you see what I'm sharing now?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd be crawling through bushes to find dappled light shining through things because, you know, this was early in my development. So I wasn't carrying lights with me. I was afraid of flash. And then I would sit down and just wait for the sun to come to a certain way. And I would play with my f-stop and just wait for things like this to happen. And certainly during golden hours, there were times where my jaw would drop at what was showing up before my eyes. But now here's the challenge as we are now in this time in the world, we're not necessarily able to run out as readily as we can. At the same time, we're also learning different skills. So while I was figuring out my camera, I was also figuring out this new thing called Lightroom. And so, you know, there were many people who said, oh, you wanna try and stay as much of a purist as possible. And then there were other people who were saying, no, being a purist is like, you know, lugging home a piece of wood and saying, okay, I'm not gonna do anything with it. That is my table or that's my chair. And so I'm sitting on a bumpy thing. So the post-processing side of things became the adjunct to the shooting side. And where it becomes really important is I am not always able to go out and get to the, at the right time of day. Hang on. And so I will invariably start with something like this. And then depending on my mood and depending on how I'm, you know, seeing an image like this, I can now turn it into something like this. And this is just in Lightroom. So here's straight out of the camera. And here's a couple of adjustments. And my class on Sunday is all about taking an image and exploring what's possible. Here's another variation. So just going from cool to warm, it is the same light, but look at how much it affects the mood when you push it a little bit. This is no different than if I had gone out with a lighting kit and colored gels. Now I can just have a little bit more control and I can do it at my leisure. So it is not an excuse for not taking great shots right in camera, toward perfecting the process in camera. But then it's about seeing what's possible after. I've said this before to those of you who've been in some of my other classes. There were times where my clients will ask me to shoot something very specific and keep it as realistic as possible. But then there's times where I'm shooting for myself where I'm just sort of seeing what I can tease out of an image from an emotional standpoint, you know, and seeing what mood I can evoke in people. So let's see, why does it keep moving on me? So just a simple color shift leads me to this. And here's a poppy that was this beautiful shade of orange in the light, but then I remember like it was in kind of cloudiness and, sorry. And then as the sun cleared, I need to move. So we went from this to this, and then this happened. Now, I pushed it a little bit further because I am, you know, I just wanted to feel happy, but from the original image to a little bit more subtlety, however you want to describe it, to I need to put a big smile on someone's face. So this is working with all of the different modules in the develop panel, and I want everyone who takes my class to walk away knowing how to push and pull images, so that if we start with this, you know, this is early one morning, this rose was just totally covered in dew, then I wanted to make it a little bit more moody. And then if I want to make it a little bit brighter and evoke a different mood. Here's a tropical plant that for me made me very happy, but then I wanted to see, you know, it's not always color that drives our mood. It's having the experience and knowing what modules to play with in order to take something to a more dramatic monochrome place. Love working in monochrome, and I find that a mood of a flower will change so dramatically depending on how you process it in a more monochrome scenario. Here's a tulip, you know, again, very early one morning. Here's the original. I was feeling perhaps a little blue, or I just wanted a little bit more contrast between the yellow green, and I wanted to highlight the image. So in this case, bringing out a little bit of blue. And it's fairly simple. I mean, this happens to be, if I go to my develop panel, I've got my screen is hidden. Sorry, I'll be back. So in a case like this, just, I want to certainly show you what's possible when we play with color temperature, but that is a global adjustment, and that is not always the best way to maneuver. So we can then go down and we will be exploring local brush adjustments, and we'll be playing with curves and learning what is possible with curves. And then I know Joseph and Kate are going to be talking about luminosity and range masking. I will be covering that to a lesser degree as part of a bigger overall Lightroom tutorial to show you how you can truly isolate different ranges of color or tonality or luminosity in an image and show you what's possible. So as we go from this image, I'm gonna, I think, end with something like this. This is a, what is this? Is this a hibiscus? It is, straight out of the camera with a little bit of matting applied. Let me make it a little bit bigger. But as I flip through and I just, start sketching a little bit to see what's possible with an image, do I want to go moodier, still more muted and matte? Or do I want to brighten things? And so being able to do this and being able to see how an image can transform, how I can take the light that was there and bend it to my will, for me is a very relaxing therapeutic process. It's also just a wonderful way of playing and creating my own reality. Let's see what's next. And again, here's a more, I call this my Nutella finish, sort of a chocolatey approach. And then things like this. So the image started here, This is straight out of the camera, but then I wanted to see what would happen if I brightened it. And so these are just some of the things. Let's play around a little bit and let's see what we can do with this image. So right away, let's go down and let's look at just working in the HSL panel and maybe just seeing if we want to sort of just shift the magenta and cool the image down a little bit. And do we want to bring the orange more toward the red? So look at the center of the image here. And again, this is, this is a simply lit flower, but now it gives you all sorts of opportunity to play and apply your own point of view, your own level of emotion to it. And that's what my class is going to do. So with that, I'm going to open it up to some questions.
All right, guys, if you have any questions, this is your chance to ask Alan himself.
Okay, it's cocktail time then.
All right. Oh, there are a bunch of them that are coming up. All right, one of them is, do you use natural or artificial light?
Both. Depends on the situation and depends on if I'm working on assignment and I know I have to get the shot, I will always bring lights with me.
All right. The other question is, how do you get the flower image so sharp?
I do only manual focus and I'm really patient. And in many cases, I will use a higher ISO because I am shooting medium format. I'm a Fuji GFX guy. So I have a bigger dynamic range and the camera has virtually no grain. So unlike other people who will shoot with the lowest ISO, I'm very comfortable starting at 400 or even 800 and knowing I'm not going to get any grain. So even subtle wind movements, I've got a fast enough shutter speed where I can just shoot through it and not worry.
Cool. One of the last questions is, can you comment on the use of your darkness in your images? I mean, I'm assuming it has to do with the mood, but.
Say the question again, Jay?
Can you comment on the use of darkness in your images?
I noticed that. It's funny, when I look at my work over time, I see that I have absolutely gone to a darker, moodier place. I don't know if it is my psyche or the fact that I live in America and we're going through this ridiculous time, but I find myself really sort of looking for bright spots amidst the darkness. I mean, that's the best sort of explanation for why I am doing what I'm doing. Invariably, like I think Padma referenced, and Jay, I think you did as well, I will do exposure compensation in camera, and yet rather than exposing to the right to get to a brighter image, I will invariably expose to the left and go darker. Or I'll do exposure bracketing knowing that if I need to, and I rarely do this, but sometimes I want like such a dark environment, and then so I will layer images and I will mask out the brighter parts. So.
Cool. I think there are a bunch of other questions, but I think I don't want to answer every question because we have such a large audience. I want to keep
Sign
this.
up, we'll do this on Sunday.
I know, that's exactly what I was going to say is, you guys, please sign up on Sunday. Alan will be spending almost 90 minutes with this, so we can have a lot of questions over here. So I will, again, put for people who are joining us late, code to sign up and 20% discount code. So I think the next series of sessions that we're going to do is from Kate Sylvia. So a lot of people have been asking questions about how do you control these lights in Photoshop or in post-processing? Well, one of the first things that you can do in Photoshop is to learn about layers and masks. And I will turn it over to Kate to see how she balances light in her images.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm just going to go ahead and start sharing my screen here and start my little keynote. All right, can y'all see that? Jay?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, good. All right, good. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Kate Sylvia, and I'm going to be talking about balancing light in Photoshop, just like Jay said. Just a little bit about me. I'm based in Charleston, South Carolina, so you'll see a lot of southern plantation and beach photos from me. But I am a former marine biologist and an aquarium curator. Used to swim with sharks for a living, so I'm really loving Shark Week on Discovery Channel right now. And you might get the occasional aquatic or even reptilian anecdote from me, so just be forewarned. All right, so let's talk about photography in general. The word photography comes from the Greek. Photo literally means light, and graph means to draw. And sometimes we refer to it as painting or drawing with light. And so this is what I like to do in my post-processing. So if you're drawing and you're painting with light, what does that make all of us? It makes us artists, right? And as an artist, you get to make the decisions about how your final image looks. Just like Alan was talking, he is creating a particular mood. That's how he wants his images to look. And you might approach that subject and come out with something completely different. And there's no right or wrong there. So you get to use the tools that you are most comfortable with, something that you can incorporate into your workflow. So what I'm going to talk about on my webinar on Saturday is just one of those tools. And it's one of the earliest tools that people learn to use in Photoshop, and that is layers and masks. So when it comes to balancing light, first I'm going to use what nature gave me. Hopefully she's being real generous. And then I'm going to go into Lightroom. So I use Lightroom. I use luminosity masks, which Joe will talk about in a few minutes. I use plugins like Nik and Topaz and Luminar. So my method is not necessarily right or wrong. It's just a tool that you can choose to use or not, but I highly recommend it. There are certain situations where selections and masks are the best way or even the easiest way to improve something in your image. So something about layers and masks that I know is that it can be intimidating. Believe me, I get it. I've been there. My first HDR set, hang on a second, there we go. This is not my first HDR set, but it's very similar. But my first HDR set sat on my computer for 6 months. Now, granted, I had just had a baby, so cut me a little bit of slack. I probably would have been able to deal with that a little bit faster if I had not had the mega time suckage going on. But anyway, I'm going to teach you how to manually blend images to find the best parts of light from all of these different exposures so that you can come out with something that looks like what you saw with your own eye while you were there in the field. And believe me, trust me, it's way easier than you think if you've never done it. So I will just walk you through those steps. I'm also going to show you how to use adjustment layers as a mask so that you can restrict an adjustment to only where you'd like it to be applied. So in this image, I did a curves adjustment, sorry, and masked it just where I wanted it to be. And if you take a look at this, that's my mask. It's sloppy. And you know what? Sometimes that's okay. I'm not a terrible perfectionist when it comes to this. Okay, maybe sometimes I am. But when you are practicing this, you can afford to be a little bit sloppy, and it still works. It's still okay. Because if you were to look at this image, would you even guess that I had done something like that? Probably not. I'm going to show you also how to create what I think is the most useful layer in Photoshop. So what I want to do here is point out a few differences between the before and after of this image, because you may not even really notice the subtleties. And I do this a lot. I do very subtle yet cumulative adjustments when I'm doing my post-processing. And so right here on the original, and this is just unprocessed. He's even a little bit soft because it's just a raw image straight out of camera. But he doesn't have a lot of detail here, and I wanted to focus more attention on his face. He is the primary subject here, and so you want to focus attention on that. And something else that I did, and you may not even notice, again, very subtle but effective, is there's actually a difference right here between the darkness of this one and the darkness of this area of the rock right here that you don't notice in the original image. And that is actually a path of light that I created in Photoshop in 2 seconds in order to draw some attention inward toward that animal. And I did it with a simple dodge and burn layer. And that is where I literally just take a very soft, low opacity brush and I paint dark and light exactly where I want it. And I think it's incredibly effective. And even though you can make these adjustments very, very subtly. So I'll show you another example of where I used that same technique. So here's an image pretty much straight out of camera. I think I may have made a tiny adjustment in Lightroom before this, but I really want to make the effort to focus attention right here on the water in the middle. And I want to take away some of the attention from this on the outer edge and maybe tone down these rocks right here a little bit. So it needed some tweaking, something that wasn't just a global adjustment. And you'll find that in my workflow when you see it on Saturday, that's exactly how I work. I do just a very, very few actually global adjustments, and then I start working very locally. So here is the improved image, and you can see if you look at these rocks over here on the left that I have in fact toned them down. I took that brush and I brightened up my water just a little bit right in here. And even when I do this dodge and burn layer in Photoshop, it actually changes the colors just a smidge. And so I'll do this actually before I do some of the other kind of intense color adjustments if the image needs it. Again, not every image needs it. But I think that the one on the right it's just a better photo. It just looks better. And it doesn't take much. Here's an image taken at Magnolia Plantation, a very popular tourist site here in Charleston. And the late day light was just coming through the trees and just hit the side of this one particular live oak tree. And I just wanted to capture that. But when I look at this image as a whole, it's pretty busy, and the white of the dogwoods is drawing my eye. And I really just needed a little bit of help focusing attention. And so I use that dodge and burn layer or curves or levels or whatever it is along with a mask in order to literally paint as if I was painting with a paintbrush. And I come up with something like this. And that final image, I really enjoyed kind of the ethereal look of it. That's what I was going for. It's just one of those kind of magical places with the Spanish moss and all the flowers. But that late day light was absolutely gorgeous coming through the trees. And I think that after just a little bit of dodging and burning and adjusting the light exactly where I wanted it, it helps focus the attention on that ray of light coming in. And less so much on the kind of outer edges of the image. So that's all I have today, quick and easy. I do appreciate your time, and I hope to see you on the 22nd. You can sign up at Visual Wilderness, and you can find me on all of these channels, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks, Jay.
You're welcome. So I have to tell you guys that Kate's tutorial on the workshop will form a foundation for what Joseph is going to talk about. So I'm going to let people ask a couple of questions to Kate before we move on to Joseph, and I see that there are some questions coming in. Let's see, what blend mode do you use to dodge and burn layer?
Overlay.
Overlay, okay. I was going to say soft light as overlay, but and do you use
Why
any?
the word opacity was
Yeah.
overlay blending mode. And I'm actually, during the workshop, I'm gonna walk through how to create that layer, and I've actually created an action in Photoshop so that I can just click play and start painting with dark and light
Cool.
immediately. So it's an incredible time saver, and I use it on almost every single image that I process. I really like to just kind of get in there and guide that light through the image exactly where I want it to go.
Excellent. Do you use any Orton effect?
I do. I use typically Color Effects Pro. I use their filter called Glamour Glow, and that's kind of the same type of thing. And again, I will put that selectively in different areas of a photo because not everything benefits from that softness. And if I maintain a little bit of sharpness here and there, that really does make a difference. But yes, I do use that, especially on those plantation images and stuff. It works really well.
All right, so I think we're not going to take a whole lot of questions here. I'm going to want to move on. So the next step in your post-processing, once you have mastered layers and masks and how to control light with it, is to go to the ultimate goal that most pro photographers use, which is luminosity mask. And talking about luminosity mask today is going to be Joseph Rosbach. So Joseph, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Hello, everyone. I am going to share my screen, so give me one moment here. All right. And so hopefully everyone can see my screen. I'm going to start off. I'm only going to show you guys one image, and I'm actually going to bring this into Photoshop so I can sort of give you a quick demonstration on what luminosity masks are, why you would want to use them, and all of the amazing things that you can do with them. So the first thing you need to think about is, what does luminosity mean? And luminosity only means brightness values, okay? So in our images, we may want to adjust highlights, shadows, midtones, and there are different ways that we can do this. And I've found over the years that using luminosity masks is the most accurate and most powerful way of making said adjustments in post-processing. And it does not have to be an overly daunting task, although it can be at first very daunting for many photographers to use. But I'm going to show you guys in my presentation and in my class how you can do that very easily, all right? So it doesn't have to be this overwhelming thing. So let's just start off with this shot. I have it in Lightroom, and this is a photograph of the subway in Zion National Park. And this is a great illustration because it is an image that is of very high contrast and extreme dynamic range, a very long exposure. And then you have this bright light coming in through the tunnel of the Slot Canyon. You have flowing water, and then you actually have very deep shadowed walls. I made a few adjustments in the raw converter here as far as setting the white balance. And doing a little highlight and shadow recovery, and then a little texture clarity and dehaze. And that's all I've done to this image. So I'm going to jump over into Photoshop now, and we're going to talk a little bit about what luminosity masks are and how you can use them in your workflow. Now, the first thing I will say here is I use the Tony Kuiper, the TK luminosity masks. This is the most recent panel. This is the TK7 rapid mask that I use extensively in my workflow. You can find out more about Tony's luminosity masks and purchase them at www.goodlight.us. And if someone would just post that into the chat so people can get that link if they want to take a look at that. They're very inexpensive, and they're very easy to use. Now, so for example, in an image like this, I have this incredibly high dynamic range, and I want to make modifications to the light. Well, there are certain ways that I could do it, and I'll show you the way that I would have done it in the past, many, many, many years ago before I started using luminosity masks. So let's say, for instance, I want to open up the shadows in the pool of water here because there's some incredible detail down here that I would like to come out in this image. There's some swirling leaves and there's some incredible color down here. Well, the old way that I would have done this is I would have maybe made a curves adjustment, and I would have globally opened up the shadows for the entire image. Now, I don't want to open up the shadows and the light globally across the shot. I want to apply it only to this region of the photograph. So now I would have to come to my mask that is associated with that layer adjustment, that curves layer adjustment that I just performed. And I would have to find a way to only apply that adjustment to this area here. So I might do something like a command backspace to fill that mask with the color black, which is now hiding that adjustment. And then I would have to grab a brush with white as my foreground color and begin to paint that brighter adjustment into the shadows. But it's sort of a sloppy process doing it that way. The way that I would prefer to do it now is to grab a luminosity mask. And the way that this luminosity mask panel is laid out, just very quickly, to make your mask selections, you're either going to choose a luminosity mask down here from the lights or the darks or the midtones, or you can also choose a color mask. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But for this, I want to adjust up the darks in the image, okay? So I'm gonna just click on one of these dark masks, and it's going to show me a black and white representation of what the mask will look like when I apply it to the adjustment, whatever adjustment it is I'm going to do. And as you can see, as I go down the numbers here, the mask is going to become more narrow. Now, one thing I want to say quickly about masks so everyone understands, a mask, the way that it works is white reveals the adjustment and black conceals or hides whatever the adjustment is. So when you're looking at a mask like this, the areas that are coming out as white or a lighter gray will receive whatever adjustment I'm about to give it. The areas that are dark or black will not receive any of that adjustment. So as I can keep going down through this, I can limit the mask essentially to pick up just the darkest tones in the photograph. Now, once I have that optimal mask selected, I need to decide what adjustment I want to do to the image. So like I said, what I wanted to do here was I wanted to lift the shadow up underneath this portion of the image right through here. So if I come down here to the very bottom to where my output slider is, I could choose any of these adjustments from curves and levels and brightness and hue and saturation to some of the specialized adjustments like dodging and burning, adding clarity, and painting with color. And there's even an Orton effect adjustment here. Well, what I would do here is I would dodge. Now, dodging is lightening an area of the image. And the reason I like to do dodging and burning so much is it allows me to selectively paint in that adjustment to regions of the image. So if I just did a curves adjustment for this, and we'll do one really quickly, it's opening up all of the shadows in the image, okay? Wherever that mask selected those shadows, you can see that that custom mask is now associated with that curves adjustment. It is opening up those shadows, right? All right, so let's go ahead and throw that out and go back into our TK panel. Just move my layer down here a little bit. And I'll grab that dark 4 mask once again. So there it is. This time I'm going to go into my adjustment. I'm going to go up here to where it says dodge. And that is automatically going to give me a new layer adjustment, a dodging layer adjustment with that mask associated with it. It automatically brings up my paintbrush and it gives me white as my foreground because I'm going to be lightening or brightening this region of the image. Now I can use my bracket keys to make the brush a little larger or a little smaller to fit the area that I want to paint. And then the other important thing you need to think about is the opacity of the brush. And this is something we'll get into deeper in class. I always start with a relatively low opacity. It's 20, 30%. I'm gonna start at about 30% for this particular shot. And let me just move my little icons here so I can see my brush properties. And I can now start to paint. And you can see as I move my brush and I'm painting a little bit brighter amount of light into that specific shadow, into the image, okay? So let me turn that layer on and off so you can see how I've brought out some detail in that shadow down here, but I haven't affected anything else in the image. So I will continue to keep going through these different luminosity masks and layer adjustments until I've basically gotten the image where I want it to be. And so this is where the creativity in photo processing comes in, just like the creativity in when you're out in the field and you're taking photographs, okay? The way that you compose an image or the kind of light that you shoot, the way that you interpret the world through your photography, you can translate into your post-processing as well. So, you know, I want to do a little bit more work to this, so let's take a look at a few more. I really want to accentuate this light that's coming in through the tunnel. That glow light is very important to the image and its overall success. So I'm going to take a look at some of my light masks now. And so when we look at a light mask, you'll see that it's going to look kind of the opposite of the dark mask. And the areas that, so this image has a lot of dark values in it because it was shot in this canyon. But you can see as we move down the light masks, it's picking up the brighter tones in the image. Another amazing thing that you can do with these luminosity masks is you can, once you have selected one, you can modify it. So if this looks like a generally good selection, I can begin to modify it with this little slider right here. So if I move this over, you'll notice that the mask is becoming a little bit more dense, a little bit more contrasty. And I can get it exactly where I want it to be. And for this, I may do probably 2 styles of an adjustment to bring out the light that's coming in through the slot canyon. The first one would probably be a dodging, because I want to brighten that light up. And I'll do that at a relatively low opacity of about 20%. And I'll just start to get in here and hit the areas where there is light coming through the tunnel. And as you can see, these adjustments are very, very subtle, very subtle. But you can see as I turn it on and off, how the light in the tunnel has gotten a little bit brighter, okay? So I'm accentuating that light, I'm moving the eye through the image. And I may jump right back into that mask again by clicking right here onto my light 1 mask. I'll modify it again, not as much this time. And this time we're gonna use a paint with color adjustment, okay? So once I click the paint with color adjustment, I get my color picker here and I can decide what color I actually want to add into the image. So I'm going to choose a very sort of rich, sort of magenta red, and I'll use my little eyedropper and I'll select this area right over here in the sandstone. And then if I want the color to be darker or brighter in its adjustment, I can simply move up to the top of the picker to pick a brighter color, okay? And I want to pick a brighter color for this because I want to add some light into the image. So when you're painting with color on a luminosity adjustment, you can either darken the color or brighten the color. So it's allowing you to continue with some dodging and burning, but with color as well. So when I click OK this time, I get my paint with color layer right here, and I'll do this at about 30%, maybe 40%, and I'll begin to paint some color into the image. And I can keep stepping up those opacity levels until I get it just where I want it to be. So you can see, and I'll zoom in on the image so you guys can get a little better idea of what this looks like. You can see the way that I'm painting with this color, it's adding some of that natural color that was there in the image, and it's also brightening up my shot a little bit, okay? So I'm very subtly, over many adjustments, building up the quality of the image. Another important aspect to this shot is the water that's flowing towards that light in the background. I composed it that way because I wanted to create a sense of visual flow so I can move the eye through the image and create that greater amount of depth and energy in the shot. So I might do something like that for this. I'll grab another mask here. I'll look for maybe a lights 2 or a lights 1. Lights 1 looks pretty good. Once again, I can modify it slightly using the slider. And then I can do maybe another dodge layer here. And what I'll do is I'll bring a bigger brush this time, and I'll start to brighten that water up just a little bit, okay? Because I want to start to move the eye into the image. And you can see what it's gonna look like when I turn it on and off. Okay, so you see I'm slowly building the shot up. Another amazing thing with these luminosity adjustments is you can work on color as well. So if I come up here to the source selection and click color, I could choose something to accentuate maybe that sort of cyan green of the pool. So if I click on that, or I click on any of these, I can see what's happening. So that does a pretty good idea of bringing out the water in the pool. And I can modify it again by using this down here. And then I'll do another maybe paint with color for this. And I'll look at that green color that's there. And I'll just add a little bit more into that, painting in some color here. So this is going to lighten this as well because I'm using a bright color, but it's also adding some more green into the image. You can see how I'm building up that pool of water. So I'm using the natural color and natural light that is available in the image and accentuating it. Another thing that you can do here, guys, and this is really fun, and I'll do maybe one or two more before I close it out and ask questions. You'll have to take the class and we'll dive very, very deeply into all of these types of adjustments on multiple images. But if I make a pixel bearing layer, Shift Option Command E, or Shift Alt Control E on a PC, and I change the blending mode of that to, let's say, multiply, it darkens the entire image. It multiplies all of the available pixels and their values in the image. And maybe I want to darken just these brighter highlights at the top of the composition. So I can now, with this new layer adjustment with the multiply blend mode, come up to my masks and start looking for a mask that does a good job of just taking the brightest values of the shot like this. And I can come down here and click this guy right here, which is going to apply that mask to this adjustment layer, like so. So now you can see how I have just taken some of those brighter highlights in the image and I've brought them down a little bit, all right? I can modify this mask even further by clicking on it, grabbing a brush that's black, for instance, and just saying, okay, I like the way the wall at the top got darker, but I don't necessarily want the brighter parts of the water or the tunnel to get darker. So I'm just going to paint black over those areas on the mask, because remember, black is going to conceal the adjustment and white is going to reveal the adjustment. So I can make sure that I'm allowing that adjustment to shine through only where I want it to be, which essentially was on this top wall up here. So I'm just taking that custom mask and I'm modifying it slightly to bring those values down, because I don't want this to be too bright up here, because it will begin to pull the eye out of the shot. Another thing that you can do with these luminosity masks, if you like using plugins, I could always go up to like a Nick filter, for instance. I could apply the Nick filter and it'll bring it in as a layer adjustment. And then I can simply go up here to my rapid mask panel and say, oh, I only want to add that filter to the brighter tones in the image, or the darker tones in the image, or just the reds in the photograph. So I can choose any one of these luminosity masks, customize it a little bit, and then just output it right to that layer. So that is the power of the luminosity mask. And let's just take a look at a before and after of what we've done on this image, okay? And you can see how that we've very gradually brought out some of the tonality in the shot. It's very soft, but you can see the way that it opens up our shadows. It closes down our highlights. We've added some color, and we could continue to work on this image until we got it absolutely perfectly right. And the other beauty about using luminosity masks is you can make some rather intense adjustments, and because they are feathered so nicely, you will not see banding or any sort of a gradation between the lights and the dark tones in the shot. So Jay, I'll go ahead and bring it back over, and then if there is any Q&A, I'll be happy to take that.
So the first one was, hey, is this a bracketed shot?
This is not a bracketed shot. So this is just a single exposure that I used for that particular image, which is one of the beautiful things about using luminosity masks. If you are shooting with a sensor that has a high amount of dynamic range, sometimes you can get away with underexposing the photograph a little bit, making sure that you're not clipping your highlights. I would recommend that you don't clip your highlights, and you can lift open those shadows in post very, very nicely.
Cool. The other question was, do you prefer to use blend diff instead of luminosity mask, or are there times where you can use blend diff?
There are times where you can use BlendIff. I don't use it particularly in my workflow. I prefer to use the luminosity masks. It's a more sped up workflow. I don't like spending hours and hours working on a single photograph. I prefer to be, out in the mountains or the desert or some remote place taking them. So, and then I have a very limited amount of time for post between keeping the office running and being out in the field. I do about 180 to 200 days a year out in the field shooting. So I do like the workflow of using the luminosity masks.
So I can also answer the question is BlendIff adjustments to me are fairly coarse. And luminosity mask, you have a control over, because once you create a mask, just like Joe showed in his last, is you can refine that mask to like a pixel level detail if you have to. So I always think that BlendIff, you can't really do that as finely as you can with a mask. So
yes, it does allow you absolute pinpoint control over the values in the image.
All right, so I think if you guys have any other questions, let me know. I think we are going to have Q&A sessions even at the end for a few minutes before we close it out. But I am going to change the mode and give the presentation over to Jack. Now, I think we have all seen that this scene that you see behind me in Iceland is not always a reality, right? We go over and take photos and we don't always get this, right? We go around wandering in the parking lot and we get lighting like that. So Jack over here is going to show us why black and white photography can be phenomenal for no matter what light you get, right, Jack?
Yeah.
I'll turn it over to you. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, because I'm pulled over. I'm on the side of a road, just jumped into a hotel lobby.
All right. Well, it looks pretty good hotel lobby.
And I'm on a hot spot on my phone. So we'll see how it goes.
All right. Go right ahead.
All right. I'm going to share a screen for a minute here. Let's see. Let's do this one first. And I will go right here. And I'm going to hit play. So I'm going to just share a couple different things. And one is, the first thing I need to tell everybody is that I am not very technical. I couldn't tell you a luminosity mask from, a blend mode. But what I can tell you is that I approach my photography in particular from a very visually driven way. And I think that'll come out in the way I use my tools and techniques. I printed in the darkroom for 35 years, and I learned everything in large format and medium format in my shooting over the years. And I've applied those same techniques to how I use Adobe Lightroom and tools and techniques like that. So I'm going to show you a little bit about what Jay's talking about is how I approach light and how I approach images, which is probably just a little bit different in some respects. So if you look at, in particular, let me move this out of the way. Here's a couple of images that the one on the left is photographed at 6:30 in the morning, but at that range of, or that time of day, the range of light is very blue, and it was overcast, and you can't really tell whether you're going to get anything or not. But I could see in my mind's eye as I visualized the scene, the black banister going up the steps with a little bit of detail in the steps here. And I kind of knew that I could create something a little bit different with this. And then if you look at the image on the right, this is Valley View in Yosemite. Well, that's a 6-7 minute exposure with almost no detail in the foreground. And if I just take this for a second and see if I could get this to go to the next images, you'll see how these things have dynamically changed in the way I manage the clarity, the contrast, the luminosity of the images. And I'm going to share all that in the class on how I can take light that is really not the epic light and try and take it to a new level in post-production to kind of get you a range of light that has dynamic range, where we're taking into consideration how we're going to work with light and shadows, how we're going to take compressed light and expand the range of light. And then we're going to use a lot of the big three tools, the radio filter, the gradation, and some of the masking and erase and burning and dodging. And I'll share that with you in a second here as well. But let me just share with you, when I go out into the field, I really think about my approach to a photograph. I many times don't even get my camera out. I just walk around a scene. I have a little viewer and I have a little black and white mono filter that I use from Tiffin, and I try to pre-visualize as much as I can, but I think about my process like this, and that is, where and how am I going to create elements of presence in a photograph that are dynamic enough that I enjoy it first and that other people may enjoy it as well. And I think about the mood, much the way Alan thinks about mood. I photograph for how I feel, how I'm connected to a scene. I think about the atmosphere in the scene, transitions in light and flow, and the range of light, contrast, clarity, luminosity. Then I think about tension. Am I feeling emotionally connected to the scene? So I will go through some of these things in the class. For very quickly, I'll go through the elements of presence, and then we'll get right into post-processing. But I will share with you, excuse me, how I look at a scene like this where it's very flat, it's very overcast, but I'm already in my mind's eye thinking about how I'm going to use the light to create something that's a little bit more dynamic, something that I have to figure out how to make this work here, but gets here. And like Alan said, maybe it was dark and that was my mood. But this is the way I kind of visualize things a lot. I mean, I've been known to print in the darkroom dark for 30 years. And a couple of friends of mine have been teachers in Ansel Adams workshops for years. And they're like, God, you print so dark. I'm like, yeah, isn't it awesome? Anyway, so I'll share with you guys how I get here. And I'm going to go to Lightroom for a minute. I'm not going to give away all the tricks so that you'll show up at the class. All right, so here's one in Death Valley. And you can see the transition where I took all the light off the mountains and I just have it coming from one very focused direction. And the footsteps in the valley are much more dynamic. And it's like this death march to nowhere in Death Valley. So, you know, it's how I connected to this as I was walking through the valley and I saw these footsteps and I'm like, oh my gosh, where's this person going? What was the story here? So I just started creating my own story, you know, or looking at mood and looking at, you know, here's an architectural image where when you get in there and you start capturing the light, what are you doing with the light to bring out the dynamic range, even though it's overcast, it's foggy. I shoot, like I just spent a whole day shooting in Asheville, North Carolina in pouring rain for about 5 hours, right? And it was one of the best days I've had in a long time. So, and again, I'll look at atmosphere. Here it's blowing snow. And these are the times that I love to go out and then go in and really take a look at what's going on and how I can expand that range of light. And rather than epic light, I tend to work quite a bit, and it works really well for black and white, is to go in as a soft light, into almost like that cloudy northern light. And if anybody has any studio experience, they used to have hazy lights that you could use in the studio or soft boxes to create that naturally soft light. Well, I love to start there and then go and expand it and add contrast, clarity, dodging, and burning to get me to a little bit different place. You know, or here's another one where the light is just really flat. And then you can take elements of the light and manipulate it so that now the trees are just black instead of having that texture in there. And now there's another layer behind it and there's depth and things like that. So I'm gonna escape from here. I don't want to share everything with you right away, but I will go into Lightroom real quickly and I'll just share with you guys. Let's see if I can. I'm not gonna be able to have to get rid of this thing. This little bar here so I can see what I'm doing. Okay. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm just gonna show you, like, this is the very first image from the Death Valley one. And then here it is in Lightroom. And then what I'll do a lot of times is
Jack, we can't see it. We can't see your
can't see it.
Lightroom.
Okay, it says I'm screen sharing. I need to pick another screen. New share,
Just
screen, got
share
it.
your desktop. Now we can see it.
Yeah, I had to pick the other screen.
Yeah.
So here it was before, and here it is when I've taken it into Lightroom. And then a lot of times what I'll do is something that I used to do when I print in the darkroom is I'll go in and I'll say, okay, I want this to go dark. I want to brighten my footsteps. And so I start, outlining how I'm visually going to do my dodging and burning to get the greatest effect. And then I'll go through that process and you can see, here's kind of a standard raw conversion in black and white. And then I'll end up in this space when I'm done. Same thing, and I'll share all this with everybody on Sunday. All my dodging and burning, how I'm using radials and adjustment brushes and grad filters, and then going back in actually with the erase tools and all the different masks that I use, and sharing with you guys how I do this stuff. Let me skip down just real quickly, and I'll share another one with you. So this is Death Valley on a very overcast morning. But what I'm seeing when I'm standing there visualizing this is how am I going to bring out the detail and clarity in the sand dunes. There's a little bit of texture, but because the light's so flat, it's very difficult to do that. And I have thunderclouds in the upper left, but I want those to be a little bit more dramatic. Your raw file looks like this, and you open it up and you're going, oh my gosh, I've got nothing. I have absolutely nothing. And then your raw conversion looks like this, and you're like, oh boy, I got a lot of work to do. And then you get somewhere closer to this, and then at the end you end up somewhere in this range where now you've got some dynamic range of light, and you've got some flow, and you're using transitions for the eye to go through the scene, from highlights to shadows, from front to back, from top to bottom. And you've created luminosity on the dunes, or in the background there, you've added some atmosphere. And now it has a whole different mood than, say, when you first open it and do a conversion and it looks like this. So that's what I will spend a lot of time on Sunday, is showing you guys how I go from these standard shots to how I bring a much more dramatic approach to it. And you won't see a lot of technical ones and zeros. What you're going to see is me go in and really look at it from the emotional connection point of view, and show you what's possible. So I hope that makes sense. I'm really excited to be part of the event on Sunday, and really looking forward to it. So.
All right. Thanks, Jack. So we have a question is, first of all, can you make notes in Lightroom like you showed on your images?
You can. It's a little hard, but you can take the adjustment brush and crank the exposure all the way up or all the way down, and then you can draw on it.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I thought it was just an image that you just showed up because you sent me one.
Yeah. No, so I can, and then you can go, if you get in a dark area, you just change the highlight or the exposure to all the way up or all the way down, or use the black, but you can do it. And size of the brush and just start writing on it.
I see. So do you work only in Lightroom, or Lightroom and Photoshop?
No, I work really 100% in Lightroom. If
Cool.
I have some really difficult retouching thing, I'll go into Photoshop and fix it.
And do you shoot large format?
I don't. I shoot with the Canon 5DSR.
Okay. Do you photograph in black and white, or always in color and then convert to black and white?
So the files are raw color, but I have my
Right.
back set to monochrome.
Okay.
So I'm viewing in monochrome, plus I use my viewing filters, to help me see the highlights and shadows a little bit before I even take the picture.
All right. So I think I want to see if I'll open up to Q&As for more Q&As. Just give me like 5 minutes to close and wrap things up, and then we can do Q&As. All right, so in essence, our online workshop that is coming up on the weekend is going to give you a range of tools to deal and master light for nature photography. We're going to start out by going in the field and how to capture light and how to recognize light and what challenges we run into and how to overcome that, and use bracketing. And then we're going to talk about Photoshop with Kate, and she's going to tell you how to balance light. And then Joe's going to take that even further using luminosity masking. And then on day 2, we're going to have Jack, Alan, and Padma. They're all going to talk about how they master light using different techniques. Jack's technique is, hey, you don't need light. You can just master light in black and white. Alan is like, I create light because I feel something. So he'll be talking about how mood affects light. And then Padma is going to talk all about backlighting. And, you know, you can create a phenomenal tonal range with backlighting. And Padma is master at that. So you're going to talk about that. So to get all of this, you can register for the classes. If you're not going to be able to make it, don't worry about it. You will have 1-year access to this. And we have a 20% discount code for next 24 hours that you can use, which is webinar 20. Now, that is my spiel for the day. So I am going to we have 5 photographers over here, but I had to drop off. So let's talk about Q&As. Do you guys have any questions? Let's hear it. And I will go through and try to pick as many as we can for the next few minutes and then go from there. All right, Joseph, the first one is for you. Can you mention the tools you use when you first survey the scene before you shoot?
My eyes. No, I mean, I spend a lot of time, like, I spend a lot of time actually just sort of walking around without my camera, or just with my camera in hand and looking for different compositions and seeing what the light can be. I don't use any specific tools like filters or viewing masks or anything like that when I'm shooting. I just pre-visualize in my mind and spend a lot of time sort of getting into rhythm or sync with the landscape or location that I'm trying to photograph.
All right. Jack, what black and white filter do you use in the field when you're viewing filter that you mentioned, right?
So it's a Tiffin monochromatic filter. It would be like a Ratten 97 from the old Kodak filters, right? So it's very opaque and almost a deep amber. And what it allows you to do is really just look at highlights. So I get to see flow of light throughout the scene. I mean, you don't see very many shadows or detail in the shadows, but you can see your highlights, outline your frame, and kind of understand what's going on with the range of light.
If you can send me a link, what I'll do is I'll actually send it out to everybody.
Yeah, they're available at like B&H.
All right. All right. So that was the other question. Okay. In zone video in Maine. Oh, okay. I see what people are saying. All right. Any other questions? All right, guys, if you guys don't have any questions, we are going to go ahead and end this. I'm going to send out the recording to everybody so people can watch this. But otherwise, we hope to see some of you on the weekend. So have a safe COVID stay wherever you guys are, and make sure you guys are watching our newsletter. We are going to put on more of these as time goes on. So thanks everybody for joining us today. Have a great day.
Hey, thanks everybody. Look forward to seeing you.
See y'all.
Safe.
Bye.